Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host Gershwin and you are watching One Mind Syndicate. Today we continue talking about Space Marines versus Orks as we get into the Corinth Crusade. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We push Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day, and don't forget to hit the little bell notification icon to stay updated. If you enjoy our content, thank our patrons on Patreon. It's because of them that we can do this. But with that said, let's get into 40 facts on the Corinth Crusade. The Corinth Crusade, sometimes referred to as the Corinthian Crusade, was one of the most famous Space Marine military campaigns of the mid-41st millennium. Conceived and led by the legendary chapter master of the Ultramarines, Marnius Calgar, the Crusade comprised of a combined force of the Ultramarines, the Angels of Absolution, the Lamenters, the Silver Skulls, the Scythes of the Emperor, and the Marines Errant chapter, as well as over 50 Astromilitarum regiments, against the powers of Ork Skargor, which had its heart in the seething maelstrom of the coordinate system, deep within the Ork Empire of Caridon in the Segmentum Ultima. At the outset of the Corinth Crusade, the Ultramarines called for allies to aid them in the holy task of scourging the mighty Ork empires of the Caridon region on the eastern fringe of the galaxy. The Lamenters answered Chapter Master Marnius Calgar's call, mindful of the ancient debt they believe they owe to the Ultramarines for their intercession many years before during the disastrous siege of Corellia during the Ninth Black Crusade. They dispatched a task force of 300 Astartes along with a battle barge, Daughter of Tempest, and her escort to serve within the Corinth Crusade. The Lamenters prosecuted the crusade tirelessly, driving back the Greenskin menace in a series of campaigns and separate battles throughout the Caridon sector. But it is the liberation of the world of Slaughterhouse 3 that proved the decisive turning point for the chapter in this campaign. This Ork mining world had hundreds of thousands of human slaves funneled into its mines, never to return. Moved by their plight, the Lamenters petitioned the Crusade command for the task of attacking Slaughterhouse 3, which Calgar reluctantly agreed to, with the provision that he could grant no further support for the Lamenters' mission. The Lamenters slipped through the Ork lines and quickly obliterated their orbital defenses, and then quickly swept any organized greenskin resistance in a remorseless assault. Seeing their brutal captors cast down, the prisoners rose up and joined the fray. In a few short hours, the planet was in the Lamenters' hands. But their victory had unforeseen problems. They had liberated 3 million human prisoners, who now looked to their saviors to deliver them from the hands of their enemies. Reluctant to leave the prisoners behind and unable to transport them away from the planet, the Lamenters resolved to fight, and if need be, nobly die while any chance for their former slaves remained. The Lamenters' tech marines desperately tried to restore the captured Ork starships to operational flight status. A single battle barge and less than 200 surviving Lamenter battle brothers stood against the nightmarish odds as a wave of Ork starships and fighter bombers attacked, only to be beaten back by the Lamenters' savagery. Unprecedented numbers of Lamenters succumbed to the Black Rage in this bloody struggle. The freed slaves took it upon themselves to end the impasse. After a last prayer of thanks to the Emperor, they signaled the Lamenters' battle barge and requested a merciful death, knowing that at least they would die as free men and women, rather than as the pawns of bestial greenskins. With another Ork fleet massing for an attack, the Lamenters had no choice and granted the former slaves the Emperor's peace by detonating a series of hundreds of seismic charges that had been honeycombed throughout the Slaughterhouse 3's mines and collapsed the tunnels. The explosions laid Slaughterhouse 3 to waste within minutes, creating one of the largest planetary tombs in Imperial history. With fewer than 100 battle brothers left standing, the battered but unbound Daughter of Tempest escaped the Slaughterhouse system, trailing a handful of converted Ork slave transports, carrying with them less than a tenth of the liberated slaves. In operational terms, the liberation of the Ork mining world had been a resounding success. The destruction of the mines had set back the Orks' buildup of war material by years, and caused interscene conflict against the various Ork clans vying for the system's mineral wealth. The Lamenters' success was only marred by the unfortunate losses incurred in the battle's aftermath. Yet their victory tasted like bitter ashes to the Lamenters, when offered the honor of the Iron Halo in rewards for their efforts for Marnius Calgar. The Lamenters took the almost unprecedented step of refusing this esteemed chapter honor. This caused some of the Imperial allies to accuse them of deliberately insulting the Crusade's commander, further breathing suspicion and dark rumors against those already ill-disposed towards the chapter. In another part of the Corinth system, the Ultramarines' third company became trapped on the dust moon of Lag after the destruction of their strike cruisers above the planetoid. The Marines Arad battered their way through the encircled horde of Ork freebooters and ramships to extract their progenitor kin from the surface. The big guns boomed out with an earth-shattering roar, and their deadly cargo screamed overhead. Boss Grabnats squinted over the shattered wall at the Space Marines deploying at the bottom of the hill. They were unfolding into neat ranks like a well-oiled machine, apparently oblivious to the explosions and the shrapnel scything past. He hawked and spat a huge glob of green phlegm over the wall. There were loads of them, almost as many of them as there were orcs in the ruins. He ducked back down and looked over his own boys. After months of fighting, the survivors were getting bigger and tougher, their green hides thicker and gnarled, just like proper orcs. They were all excitedly slapping magazines into their shooters, cracking knuckles, sharpening fangs and blades, and bragging about how many Marine boys they were going to kill. Grabnats decided that he would have to keep an eye on young Scabsnick. The extra slab of muscle he was growing, and the look of his eye, showed he had started to get ideas of being a boss. He'd need to be taught a lesson pretty soon. Time for that later, he thought, as he cursed them all roundly for being slackers and kicked them into a fighting line. No more than 2 or 3 to each gap in the wall. The last boys were just in place as Space Marine bolter fire started blasting lumps out of the wall. Grubnax bound to his feet and started blazing away. The boys followed suit. Up and down the ruins he could hear the shout and other mobs firing. The noise alone was incredible. It pounded at his ears like a tribe of insane drummers. Great daggers of flames stabbed out from the shooters, and hot shell casings spewed everywhere. The resulting storm of fire whipped across the armored ranks, and sparks flew as shots ricocheted off the Space Marines' armor. Some of them fell, but the line kept stubbornly advancing. There was a flash and a roar a split second before the boss found himself hurled to the ground. A series of explosions followed. Rubble and dust flew from the walls with each concussion. Smoke and flames were snaking through the ruins as the boys clambered to their feet. Several were wounded, and some didn't get back up at all, even when they were kicked. Scabsnick was unconscious enough to stand up right next to a gap in the wall, and was blown to bits by bolter fire. The boss felt vaguely disappointed that he wouldn't get to fight Scabsnick, now that the stupid Zogger had gotten himself killed. The Space Marines must be getting close now, he thought. Time to back off to the courtyard. He led the dazed remnants of his mob in a crouching run back to the hollowed shell of a building on the other side of the courtyard. Shots snarled and roared over his head as they ran, but nobody was hit. There the big guns were being readied for another shot. Slavers cracked their whips, eliciting the shrieks of pain from the grots, struggling to push the guns into position and lug more ammo forward. The boss took his boys to join up with the remnants of Ruzgob's mob. Ruzgob and his boys mocked them as they came up, but it put more heart back into the boys as they mocked back. Got chewed up and spat out. Ruzgob shouted. "Didn't see you up there, worm food," responded the boss. "You was too busy running like a runt," Ruzgob added, emphasizing by kicking his ammo runt a good 3 meters. It was an impressive kick, but the boss wasn't about to concede that. At that point, armored figures pushed through the gaps in the outer wall, and further exchanges of wit were cut short by the big guns going off again with a crash that sounded like the end of the world. The carnage was impressive. What was left of the wall was painted with bright red blood, and armored bodies were piled high around it. Ruzgob and Grubnats led their boys into the open and charged forward, howling and losing off shots as they ran. The surviving Space Marines didn't run for it or even back away, though the boss had fought Space Marines before, so he didn't really expect them to. Instead, they leveled their bolter and started firing. Boys were blown apart left, right, and center, but they kept going. The boss's boys weren't going to be outdone by Ruzgob's scum. They were about to barrel into the Space Marines when a huge chunk of the wall tumbled inward, and a massive, armored shape of a dreadnought lurched through the gap with a cannon blazing at the charging mob. Without pause, the dreadnought plowed into Ruzgob's mob like a juggernaut and almost disappeared as the Orks hurled themselves at it. The Space Marines charged to protect their dreadnought, and in an instant, the whole courtyard had dissolved into a sprawling hand-to-hand combat. This was the time all Orks lived for, the roaring, blood-pumping, heart-racing mayhem of face-to-face fighting. The boss brought his chopper down on the helm of the first Space Marine he reached, but it glanced off the shoulder plate. The Space Marine raised a bolter pistol and blew a chunk of the boss's shoulder, which stung like crazy and made him really mad. The boss struck back with a roar, hitting at the joints in the Space Marine's armor, his elbows, knees, and neck, places where he was vulnerable. In a few quick chops, the Space Marine was face down in the mud, and the boss was blasting his slugger into the back of another one his boys were having trouble with. Ricochets flew wildly, but one shot hit something vital in the Space Marine, and he crumbled. The boss's arm was starting to stiffen up now from the wound, but his blood sang with the joy of violence, too much to take notice. He blazed away with his slugger, reveling in the solid kick of it each time it fired. When it was empty, he threw it at the dreadnought, which was busy ripping off the last of Ruskop's boys. He roared with laughter and swung his chopper to split the skull of a Space Marine who was trying to get to his feet. This was the life, the boss thought. In recognition of this deed, the Marines Errant received in gratitude one of the Ultramarines' own sacred relic blades as a sign of mutually shed blood of the two chapters. All in all, the success of the Corinth Crusade not only beheaded and scattered Skargor, but also delayed any further major Ork incursions into Imperial space from the Caradon region for more than 30 standard years. And those were 40 facts on the Corinth Crusade. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys have any other major crusades or major campaigns that you guys would like us to talk about, comment down in the comment section below. Thank our patrons for the support. It's because of them that we can do these videos. Link in the description if you guys want to support us. It's $1 a month. But with that said, I'll talk to you tomorrow. This is Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.